Hi, what do you think is the problem with this code snippet? The problem is that its meaning is very unclear. It's obvious that the code checks if employee weekly hours is greater than or equal to 45. But what does that mean? What exactly is being checked here? And why? It's hard to understand. So, how do you solve this issue? You simply give a name to that value. Let's call it minimum weekly hours for bonus. Now, what this if statement does is clear. It compares employee weekly hours to minimum weekly hours for bonus. And it's very easy to also understand why it does that. Obviously, in order to check if the employee is entitled for a bonus. Let's look at another example. Again, what does comparing the employee's department ID to 3 and to 5 mean? It's very hard to tell. So again, what should we do? Give those two values a name, abroad department's IDs. And now we'll refactor that if statement to check if abroad department IDs contain the employee's department ID. And so, if we look at it from the meaning level, it's again very clear. We check if the employee is in a department which is an abroad department. Okay, so one problem with explicit values is that they are meaningless. But let's consider another problem. And for that, let's go back to our first example, comparing employee weekly hours to 45. Remember, we know that 45 is the number of hours it takes for an employee to work in a week in order to get a bonus, although this can't be understood just by reading this if statement. Now, suppose some developer gets a task to change the number of hours it takes to get a bonus from 45 to 40. So, he finds this if statement and changes the number 45 to 40. But what if that number appears elsewhere? Suppose on some report file that calculates how many employees deserve a bonus. For the developer who changed that number, it's very easy to not notice that the number appears again elsewhere. And so by changing only the 45 in the original if statement, but not in the report's if statement, a new bug is created. This could have been prevented if that value had been assigned to a variable. And then, whenever the value is being updated, it's updated only once, in that variable, and that change happens everywhere in your code. Before we sum up, I would just like you to note that values that their meaning is unclear are not always numbers. They could be strings or other types as well. For instance, in the department's example, the original code could have been using strings instead of numbers. The solution would have been the same. So, to sum up, we saw two problems with values that appear explicitly in code. The first is that on their own, they are almost always meaningless. It's hard to understand what they represent. And the second is that they might be changed separately, which might lead to bugs. There is one solution to both these problems. Provide them with meaning by assigning them to variables with meaningful names, and use that variable everywhere you need it in your code. So that's it for this lesson about explicit values. I'll see you in the next lesson.